Hey, this is Dominic, and this is your home for the cutting-edge conversations on optimizing your personal performance, lighting up your sex life, and living a purpose-driven life of your own design.
These are the topics that Dominic and I have both struggled with in our own lives and still don't always get right. This is Brian. Welcome to the Great Man Podcast.
I see so many men trying so hard to get that thing that they want out of life. Whether it's finding their purpose or financial freedom, starting their own business, learning to love their body, finding romantic love, and yet routinely falling short of getting what they desire. Now, it's rarely due to lack of trying, and it's certainly not due to a lack of thinking about it, right? We as guys know how to think and calculate and ruminate until we exhaust ourselves. No, what it's often due to is a lack of awareness of the wounds that we've endured much earlier in life. And those wounds caused us to shut down essential parts of our inner world because it was too painful. Now think of this shutdown as trying to drive across the country when every major freeway and interstate is barricaded. It's impossible for you to get where you're trying to go. So in this episode, Brian and I are going to be exploring 3 of the common masculine wounds that come up over and over and over again in our mastermind communities that serve as these barricades to you getting where you want to go. And by exploring these wounds and ultimately removing those barricades, you'll be in the fast lane to getting to your destination. Enjoy this episode on exploring 3 common masculine wounds.
Dom, over the last couple of weeks, you've given us some big information. Last week, you mentioned that you were diagnosed with Lyme disease and you're in protocol for that. And a couple of weeks before that, you were talking about your ping pong game. So your virtual ping pong game. So
Correct. Virtual reality.
I don't know where you want to start, but I would love to get an update on both of them.
Okay. I've got no updates for you on VR ping pong. I haven't played in a week because this past week has been a big treatment week for me around Lyme disease and other things. So yeah, I mentioned in last week's podcast that I finally figured out what this 18-month mystery illness was, and it's Lyme disease and also Epstein Barr. I made the announcement on an Instagram this week, and it was heartwarming and overwhelming how many people reached out. And it's been eye-opening, Bri, to see how many people have been struggling with chronic undiagnosed illnesses in their lives and how it can feel so isolating and frustrating and hopeless. Going to so many doctors, not getting the diagnosis you're looking for, starting to feel like you're crazy. It's like, is it all in your head? Many of us, just exchanging messages with so many of you who have reached out to me and shared your support and your stories, I can start to feel a kinship. This is weird, Bri. Like, I'm so supported, right? I'm in men's groups. We run masterminds. Like, there couldn't be more men who are closer to me in my life. I'm so supported. But if you're going through a health journey that no one else can relate to, it can feel lonely, even amidst all that support.
It turns out that even with the support, that you're the only one in there.
That's right.
You're the only one experiencing those experiences. And so that certainly, without hearing the stories of others and what they've been going through, can feel really lonely.
Which, again, I've talked about this recently, about how this experience has made me a better teacher. Now knowing it can feel lonely to be inside of a group who doesn't understand your experience. Now I understand if there's one man of color in a group of white people, what he could be feeling. You could do your best to try and relate, but you don't know what it's like to be a man of color in a group of white people. If there's a man who's got body image issues, like in our men's group, we had, 7 or 8 really fit guys and one guy who had body image issues. And he said, you guys don't understand me. Like, you won't get it. I can have compassion for that now, because even with the love and the true care, if you haven't walked a mile in that person's shoes, if you haven't had that experience, there's always going to be a place that you just can't meet them. And so understanding that as a space holder is really important, and it's a blessing. I wanted to just give a quick update on that before we get into the topic today, because also I've begun my treatments. I'm on my 4th treatment. I got it done yesterday, and I usually feel pretty shitty after the treatments because there's a lot of stuff changing in my body. I don't have my best today. So if I'm rambly or wandering or just not as coherent as normal, it's because I'm dead in the middle of this treatment thing.
So that we can avoid everybody turning off this podcast and going to Google Epstein Barr. Can you give us just a quick 10 seconds on what is that?
It's something I'm learning a little bit more about, but apparently it is a virus that in the United States apparently affects, according to some studies, like hundreds of millions of people. It is considered to be the mystery illness of the mystery illness categories. And what that means is it's a precursor to chronic fatigue syndrome. It's a precursor oftentimes to mononucleosis, to lupus diagnoses, and many times it's not diagnosed, but it can be triggered from stress if you have stress in your system. And so many people in the States are living unknowingly with Epstein-Barr. And a lot of these mystery symptoms you have, like brain fog or fatigue, can be a result of Epstein-Barr that's just not diagnosed, or it's in its early stages, because I think there's like 3 or 4 stages of Epstein-Barr.
And one more question on this, because I certainly wake up sometimes feeling fatigued, and I don't know if it's Epstein-Barr. Was there a test that you took? How did you find out that this was something in conjunction with Lyme disease that you had?
So I'm going to this world-class medical facility, medical clinic on Long Island called the New York Center for Innovative Medicine. They do these high-quality blood tests. So all you take is a little drop of blood. They can run a panel of all the different diseases, illnesses that are out there using, I think it's called bioenergetic resonance testing. I may have that a little bit off, but they look for the vibration of certain diseases. And what they picked up with me was Epstein-Barr, with Lyme disease and severe toxicity. You know, you want your body to be alkaline. That's why Wim Hof calls it alkaline breathing. I'm severely toxic right now in my system, which is natural for someone who has these kinds of diseases that are prominent.
All right, man. Well, happy that you're on the road to recovery, and we'll see how your energy holds up today.
Yeah. Thanks, man. I appreciate your support. And before we get into the topic of conversation today, I wanted to give a little shout out to something I saw that was awesome in the Great Man Within Facebook group, which you guys can always join. I always put at the top of the show notes. There was a member, his name was Greg. He put a little post up in the group, said, "I've been a silent watcher of the group for a long time. So long story short, I'm looking for a small accountability group where we can help each other through a weight loss journey. I feel like I'm at the point where I need the support of other men in the journey because I can't seem to do this alone. I'm thinking a group text thread and maybe a Zoom or something for a half hour a week just to be accountable to one another for what we eat and how we meet our exercise goals would be helpful. Are there any takers?" And I think there were about a half dozen men who jumped in to say, yeah, that's exactly what I would want accountability with. So I just wanted you guys who are listening, who are either a part of the Facebook group or who haven't joined yet, that's what's available for you. And this was a man who hasn't really spoken up publicly in the group, but finally decided to do so. And he was met with an accountability group, of 5 to 6 guys. So Facebook group, Great Man Within, is linked at the top of the show notes. Join us now. So the topic of conversation today is exploring 3 common masculine wounds. Before we get into the wounds, let's talk about why it's important to look at the places where we're wounded. I think everyone, Bri, can relate to this idea that you want something in your life that you're just not getting. Right? We always talk about how there's this next level that's calling your name, right? Next level in making money, next level in your career, next level in purpose and passion, next level in relationship. Every man who's listening to this podcast has something that he wants that he's not getting. And it begs the question, why? And oftentimes in the work that we do, and we see this from running, 3 different masterminds and having dozens and dozens of men in these groups working on their own personal next level, what we have a chance to see is what prevents them from getting the thing that they want is there's some wound that hasn't been addressed inside of them. And the wounds cause pain that cause us to develop, and this is a very important term that we're going to be talking about today, this inner armor to form around our hearts. In our community, I would say there's like 2 really important key concepts that men talk to us all the time about and say these 2 concepts have revolutionized their life. The concept of drifting, right? That experience of you're just kind of going through life on autopilot, thinking you're making decisions, but it's really just your habits and patterns that are causing you to just, go through life in status quo, not intentionally. And then this concept of lone wolfing, the man who's spiritually, emotionally, and mentally going through life on his own. The precursor to drifting and lone wolfing is this inner armor that you build up inside to prevent you from feeling those really painful feelings. It causes a system shutdown. And behind that wall of inner armor is where you put the parts of you that weren't accepted, the parts of you that other people questioned, the parts of you that people ridiculed. And we're going to get into some really tangible examples of what that can look like.
How often are guys aware of these things? How often do they come to you and are like, hey man, like I got this wound, like I'd like to heal it. What does that actually look like when you work with guys?
It's such a great question because the answer is nobody knows that they got this wound. Like for the most part, like I don't want to say nobody, 99% of the men who come in don't know that they have a wound. What they know is that they want something that they're not getting. Okay. So for example, this past weekend, I ran Mastermind 2.0's immersion, right? That's the group that you're not a part of, but Michael Young and Mark Melvin are helping shepherd. And as I look at the men across that group, we have one guy who wants to really find his purpose and passion in life because he's been on a hamster wheel for like 10 or 15 years in a job that he doesn't love anymore, but he can't seem to find what lights him up inside. Can't find his greatest energy. We have another guy in the group who struggles with commitment, right? He'll start things, won't finish them. He'll start relationships, go really deep, but then he'll leave them. He'll join men's groups and then be like, this group just doesn't feel like the right one for me, and then leave them. We have another guy who desperately wants intimacy in his life, but can't seem to find anyone who gets him or understands him. And then he just gets angry and pushes people away. We all have these things that we want in life and we're not getting them. That's where, when we look at the thing that you want and you're not getting, there's usually some uncomfortable truth that lies beneath that. And that uncomfortable truth is typically wrapped in a wound that you haven't looked at yet.
So it sounds like these guys, they've been around long enough, if you will, to identify that like something's not working.
Yep.
Whatever program that I'm running, I've seen it enough times now where it's not working for me. It's taking up, it's consuming my energy, it's consuming my time. And in your words, I'm not getting what I want. So what's up? Like, why do I keep running into this exact same pattern over and over again? Yeah.
Yeah. The pattern you're talking about is huge. So for the men who are listening right now, if you are listening to this and you're trying to bring in your own life, I guess the question is, what is it that you're going after in life that you haven't gotten yet? And as you're listening to the rest of this conversation, start to make this really personal for you. Okay. So we're going to look at these 3 common masculine wounds that cause a man to build up this inner armor. And the inner armor is often built up when it's trying to protect you, to keep you safe from these really painful feelings you don't know how to process inside, don't have anyone to talk to about it. It typically happens during childhood. But then that armor becomes really fucking stifling. And you're trying to grow out of it, but when the system is so deeply entrenched, it's really difficult to. So the first of these common masculine wounds is that your emotions weren't welcome. Okay. This is the first of the common masculine wounds. Your emotions weren't welcome. And I'm going to give you a very particular story from one of the men in our mastermind this past weekend. But from most men's experience, if not all men, I think we can all relate to the idea when we were kids, boys don't cry, don't be a pussy, right? Rub some dirt on it, toughen up, like you name your flavor of that. You learned very early on that your emotions were not manly. They were not masculine. They were unbecoming of a boy. You lost respect. And so when those difficult emotions come up, the ones that may make you feel sensitive or vulnerable, you learn that those are unsafe feelings. So boom, the armor comes up. An example of that, Rick, we'll use Rick from this past weekend. Rick was working on, why can't I commit to something and finish it? And also, why can't I speak my truth when I feel like I have something to say, but I get scared of conflict. I get scared of the repercussions, right? So, and this guy's a really confident dude. He's very articulate. And when he speaks, everyone listens. So he's already got a lot of this, but a lot of it is polished on the surface. He goes, I know how to fake it. I know how to make you guys believe that I'm speaking my truth, but in here, there's like a tornado that I can't overcome it. So what we ended up finding in doing a deep process with him, where we were trying to get some of those emotions up, was he found that when he was a kid, his father, who had a drinking problem, would come home, and his father was a big guy, and he would get in Rick's face and tell him what a piece of shit he was. He would, he had some really emotional things to say to his son, Rick. And Rick sometimes tried to fight back emotionally, and it would get physical sometimes. So Rick would get abused emotionally and sometimes physically. And as a kid, that was really unsafe. So the process that he learned, which was beautiful in its simplicity to protect him, was that armor would come up anytime he felt like he had something emotional to say. When he wanted to stand up for himself, it was unsafe because he could get hit. So the armor comes up, shuts it down. If you can picture, kind of like sometimes when anger or rage comes up, it can start low and then come up through that center channel. But what he developed was this system that goes, whoosh, shuts it right down. And what that led him to over the course of time was in other interactions with romantic partners, or especially with groups of men, right? Because that would trigger kind of the father thing. When he would find a triggering guy in the group that like he had something to say to, he felt the emotion come up and the system would turn on, the armor would come on, and then bang, he'd be like, I can't say that. And then he would hold a resentment against that guy. He would feel disassociated from the group. And he'd be like, you know what? These aren't my guys. They don't feel understood. No one really knows what's going on inside of me. He would go home, talk to his partner. She wouldn't know what's really going on inside of him. And then he'd feel all alone and lost. And then he'd leave a group and then go look for the next one. So I'll pause here to see what's coming up for you, man.
Yeah, I mean, this is a good example of something you mentioned at the beginning where this armor that we build is the precursor to either drift or lone wolfing. In this story for Rick, we can certainly see how it would lead to lone wolfing, right? Whether it's people, groups of guys not understanding me or a romantic partner not understanding me. And that's the pattern. And I'd say good for Rick. Like Rick was able to identify that he's done these things enough times. He's gone in groups and left and probably feels something about that afterwards. And he's had relationships that haven't worked out for some mysterious reason.
Yes.
And I love where Rick's at right now because he's asking those deeper questions. He's like, okay, I've identified the wound. Now what? What do I do now?
Yes. And that was the key, Brian. He had no idea why he couldn't speak his truth. He had no idea why he couldn't commit. And when he figured it out, that this was the system, and he did some serious release, did some anger release, and we heard him in a way that we've never heard him before. It was like the strength inside this man. Holy shit. I mean, he was kind of a very gentle man who then found his voice and his power. And we're like, wow. And then the remainder of the weekend, he sat so confidently in that seat of power when he had things that needed to be said that were actually quite provocative and confrontational to some other guys in the group. He said it from a really centered and confident place that we'd never heard him before. And this whole past week, he's just been texting me, regularly like, oh my God, here's the next unraveling of that. So the system that he originally had was trying to protect him from feeling those emotions that weren't welcome. And I can guarantee you that every man who's listening to this podcast had emotions that were demonstrated as a kid that were not welcome. And I had them as a kid. I had a lot of tantrums as a child, and, there were punishments that pushed those emotions back inside of me. And it taught me to be like really, really scared about expressing myself throughout the course of life until I unraveled that. And now I speak expressively.
We started this podcast talking about Lyme.
Yeah.
And about the symptoms sometimes associated with Lyme or Epstein Barr, right? Fatigue, brain fog, those sort of things. And what we're talking about right now is not any different than that. When we're operating from this place of woundedness, we may not be able to consciously say, hey, this is where I was wounded, or this is what I want that I'm not getting, or this is my pattern, right? Rick got there,
yep.
But it took something to get there. And so for anybody listening to this right now, and I know this has been true in my life, when I am operating from that wounded place, immediately after an action, I can feel it. I can feel a dissipation of energy. I can feel a little bit weaker. I can feel like I'm not doing the thing that my great man would do. And one of the reasons I love that meditation is because I can visualize into the future what a great man would do. And it makes it that much more obvious when I don't do that sort of thing. So if you're listening to this podcast right now and you're thinking about like, well, I'm feeling pretty good and I haven't really seen any patterns or anything like that. Cool. Like look at your interactions, usually with people, not always, but look at your interactions and see where your energy goes. We have a great exercise that we've gone through the masterminds with, and it's called Where is Your Greatest Energy?
Right.
And we go through all these daily activities that we do and we identify like what is our greatest energy. Well, we can do this on the flip side. We can do this with wounding too and figure out what are those interactions that are in my life that make me feel weaker, that make me feel less than, because there's some energy there. There's some emotion there. So that's the compass. That's the tool that we can use to identify like what wounds should we be looking at.
That's awesome. Yeah, we're definitely going to develop a process around that for like kind of the opposite of greatest energy. What gives you your worst energy? And that's typically the wounds. The last thing I'll say on this around your emotions weren't welcome, there was a big theme that came out this weekend for fathers. And fathers, I'm speaking to you here. When your emotions weren't welcome as a child, you can kind of go one of two ways as a father. Number one is like you overcorrect and really allow, a lot of emotional expression. Maybe not overcorrect, but you maybe can be very conscious and welcoming the emotions from your child. But the second way is, and we saw this with a number of the fathers in the group, stifling your child's emotions because that's what you were taught. And, there's some stories in the group from men who, saw their kids getting emotional and feeling embarrassed by that, feeling embarrassed that their kid is emotional or emotionally expressive or crying. And there's some worry that, that they're hurt. And of course, there's the protective instinct, but there's also some stuff in there around, well, hey, you're not supposed to be that emotionally expressive. And so for fathers, just really look at the residue of what you were taught and recognize how that may be showing up in the way that you're potentially parenting. Because we had a number of men go, oh my God, I've been stifling my child. So the second wound that is really prevalent in men is your differences weren't accepted. What makes you different, what makes you unique is not accepted. And again, this can happen, from childhood, but I even think from my own personal experience of, fraternity in college. My fraternity when I was in college, I have a real ambivalent recollection of that experience. Like I loved it. And I also have a lot of animosity when I think about my time in fraternity because it was such a groupthink environment. And you did look a certain way. You had to hang out with certain people. Otherwise you'd get ridiculed. There's only a sense of humor, one style of sense of humor that was welcomed. And everyone kind of conformed to fit that thing that I guess a few of the group leaders were like, this is what's acceptable. And I remember feeling like really kind of lost and trapped and angry and upset about it. And I didn't really find my voice in who I was until after I left, the college and started finding my space from that to figure out like, who do I want to hang out with and what are my interests beyond just the narrow focus of what was accepted there. And I think a lot of men can relate to this from a variety of perspectives.
When we talk about, for men, the types of groups that we're in starting at a pretty young age, coming up through adulthood also, there's often, a binary association with the groups that we're in. So in sports, there's a singular purpose. And either you are good or you're not good. Either you're like contributing towards the end goal or you're not contributing towards the end goal. I don't know about you, Dom, but growing up playing baseball, there was always that strange kid that got probably picked last and kind of put on the team, whose mom maybe wanted him to, be with a group of people and didn't know what else to do with them. But it was a weird kid because they didn't fit in. He didn't play baseball very well. He didn't socialize very well. It was just like a really strange kid. And in the context of sports, which is very binary, it's either you're contributing or you're not contributing, like that can feel really isolating. Yeah. And there aren't a ton of opportunities for us to live in those environments that aren't binary. The work is no different than that, right? We have a lot of performance related things. So I think when we start to get into these groups as adults where we have the opportunity to see the differences and see the uniqueness as, wow, like what a cool new perspective, or this is very interesting. But it doesn't happen very often, especially at a younger age.
Right. I mean, one of the guys in the group from this past weekend, we'll call him Nick, because I guess we'll rhyme, Rick and Nick. He grew up very different. he wasn't interested in sports like all the other boys were interested in sports. And he took an interest in fashion, and his fashion style is on point. It's loud. It's provocative. Not everyone can vibe with it. There's just these differences. And, what he started to share was throughout his life, he would get ridiculed by the people who were closest to him for that. People would tease him. And what happened as a result of that is he's like, well, I don't feel, and these are words that men never use, but like, I didn't feel safe. Like when you're a kid, you don't realize you don't feel safe. You just realize, man, these people are picking on me. And these are the people who are supposed to be my friends or my family members. And they're the ones who are coming at me. So what do? You build that inner armor up, right? I don't give a fuck. I don't give a fuck what you think. I don't want to trust anybody. And when that goes up, then you become, quote, self-sufficient. You don't need anyone. You march to the beat of your own drum, and you can take some pride in that. And that's one of the things about lone wolves. Lone wolves are prideful animals. Like when you talk to a lone wolf who hasn't kind of come to the grips with the fact that he's sacrificing his mental, emotional, and spiritual well-being, he's really proud of being a lone wolf. Like, yeah, no, I'm good. I don't need anybody. But that I don't need anybody, the energy that underlies that is typically, I've been fucked by people. I've really been fucked by people and I don't trust them. Therefore, I'm just going to go on my own, and it's safer to keep this thing armored up. And the irony is, one of the men in the group who's been working on this, where, a big part of his inquiry is, why don't I let anyone get close to me? Why don't I want anyone to get close to me? I truly believe his deepest desire is intimacy, is to be known. And it's something that he is on the path of exploring. And he did give me permission to share this. One of the texts he sent this past week was, I thought I needed to learn to see myself differently, but I'm finding that it's unlearning decades of ridicule and scrutiny from those closest to me that I need to address. And this again goes to the part of there are differences that each of us have that at some point in time, we tried to show it and it was beaten back into us. Like, that's not okay. You won't be loved. You won't be accepted, or you'll be off the team. And those are the moments that we get wounded and we stuff a part of ourselves away that's important. All right. The third and final wound that causes us to build that inner armor, which eventually stifles our ability to feel what we're feeling and to know what our purpose and passion is. It's the thing that really prevents us from finding that next level. The third thing is you were taught to abandon your own inner compass. You were taught to abandon your own inner compass, and said differently, someone else knows better than you. Now, I think many of us can relate to this, where I grew up and I was taught that like authority figures were to be trusted. Parents, teachers, religious figures, police officers. And there's a difference between, respecting and having discernment for authority and then abdicating complete responsibility for what's going on in here. Do I feel like that adult, just because that person's an adult, like knows what's better for me than I do? And many of us abdicate that responsibility because it's stripped from us at an early age. And what ends up manifesting as a result is we look for external validation, right? To teach us what's okay and what's not. And what's coming up for you as I share that?
This is such a powerful one, man. And when I think about the people in the world, at least how they come across, that feel free, that are doing their own thing, that are maybe even a little strange, they seemingly don't care about what the external world is saying. Like, their focus of control is so internal. That to me feels really powerful.
Yeah.
And it begs the question of us having to look at, like, well, what do I actually want?
Right.
Like, not who am I trying to please, not what has this person said, not what does culture say that's okay. And this is really just the heart of what we talk about here, is like, well, what do I actually want? And believing that, like, that's okay. That's okay that I want that. I was listening to a podcast with Jim Dethmer, who we've mentioned a few different times. He runs the Conscious Leadership Group. And he said the hardest question for people to answer is, what do I want?
Yeah, yeah.
And the second hardest question is, what do I really want? And
yeah.
And so, and so I think that this is such a big one, is just, well, where am I at, regardless of where the rest of the world is?
Yeah. And it's hard to find that out when you don't realize where that inner compass went. Let's talk about some of the, like how that happens really subtly. One of the guys in the group, we'll call him now Dick. Okay. So you get to be Dick.
We got Rick, Nick, and Dick.
You got Rick, Nick, and Dick.
Fantastic. Okay. All the icks.
Well, I think we got one more ick coming. So Dick, when he was a kid, his father was the one who said, your grades aren't good enough, or you're not measuring up, right? Or great job. And it was always the father's approval that loomed the largest in Dick's life. And so he didn't know, when he gave his best effort should I be proud of that? I have to wait for dad to weigh in. I have to wait for dad to tell me what I should be feeling on the inside because it's his approval that matters. And the way that manifested over the course of his life is he's always looked, this is a successful man. He's doing really well in business and in life, but he's kind of reached this plateau. He's in his mid 40s, this plateau of, I don't feel like I've reached greatness yet. And this man is very capable of greatness because his pattern is he's always looking to the authority figure man who's ahead of where he is. And he's like, how do I become that guy? Right? How do I become that guy who's 10 years older than me? That's, 10 years further along his path versus what if I were to just stop wanting to be the man, to be that man and to be my man, my version of that. And that's a massive shift that he was only able to, and this is an inquiry he started a year ago, when he finally was able to see, oh, my programming when I was a kid was to abdicate leadership to my father. Now I can unlearn that system. All right? These are all just a series of systems. They get triggered in a moment. And that's why if you don't have an awareness practice, a mindfulness practice, the system will activate, you will miss it completely. That's why we do so much around breath work and monkey mind and, awareness. Now these guys are starting to see, and Dick can start to see now, oh, that's where that came from. And now when that urge comes up, I can let it go and start asking those Jim Detmer questions. What do I want? What do I really want?
One of the symptoms, going back to this idea of having symptoms, one of the symptoms of this is a feeling of numbness.
Sure.
I can promise you that when Dick is looking up at the guy that's 10 years older than him, maybe a little more advanced in the career, maybe making a little more money, when he's like, what do I need to do? How do I need to strategize to get and be that person? I can promise you that comes with a level of numbness.
Yes.
And when this guy says that I'm looking for my purpose, I'm looking for my thing, he's actually looking for the thing that lights him up.
Yes.
And there is no person that he can point to say well, that's going to be, because he's got to develop that on his own. And without, to your point, having the breath work, having the meditation, and really sitting down and saying well, what is it that I want? That is never going to happen. And it's a fool's errand. I remember Jim Carrey, he said, he's got a really famous quote that says I hope that everybody becomes famous, because then they'll realize once they get to famous, that that's not actually the thing that makes them happy and passionate and the best version of themselves. And they can then stop chasing that and go find the thing that actually makes them happy inside and lights them up inside. And so not everybody wants to be famous, but I can promise you that a lot of people are pointing to external things and saying, when I get there, that's what's going to light me up. And what they don't know is it's the actual process of going through and figuring out who I am, what I want, and the steps towards that.
Yeah. If you want to know what lights you up, it will be impossible to find behind an armor that has your emotions and your heart in a cinch. It's impossible. And that's why we see so many guys who are trying to find purpose. I'm thinking about my purpose. What do I want to give me purpose? And it's this thought calculation. Purpose is not a neck up experience. It's not a brain thing. It's an emotion thing. It's a feeling thing. And Mark Melvin said this at the retreat last weekend. He said, purpose is not something that you are entitled to. You got to fucking work for it. And I was like, wow, that's some wisdom right there. And the work is unarmoring yourself. That is the work. And that's why we talk so much about emotional fluency. And that's why I believe alongside on this upper echelon of important concepts of drift and lone wolfing, inner armor is now right up there in the triumvirate, because if you understand that you have built a system inside of you to protect yourself. And by the way, it was a beautiful thing when you were young and didn't have the mechanisms. It was the thing that you needed at that time, but you're outgrowing it. If you want to find purpose, if you want to be accepted for differences, if you want to find intimacy, if you want to rely on your inner compass, then that armor has got to go and that system's got to change.
I was talking to somebody recently and they're like, man, I think I need to take a year off of work and go in the woods and just like really, really transform, like really be different. And I started laughing. And I was like, what do you think is going to be back in the real world when you come back?
Right. Just another lonesome experience. Good.
Right, exactly. Now, this is not a knock. I mean, we run retreats, right? We know how powerful groups can be, and we talk about, brotherhood and tribe and everything else. And that's hugely, hugely important. So I'm not knocking that. But what I am saying is that we have an opportunity every single day with every single interaction that we have to feel what it's like to be ourselves, to identify what we want, to figure out where we're numbing out or where we're actually feeling energy, to speak our mind. And so this path of identifying these wounds and working through them, this is not something that you go and take a class on, right? To your point, Dominic, it's not neck up.
Right.
This is something that we have an opportunity to work on every single day. And that's why when David Deida says, and I know it's a quote that we use often, is like being at that edge and living at that edge. That's what we're talking about. So every single day of our life, we have a choice that when we interact to speak the mind. In, I think it's Nick's case, to say like, here's who I really am.
Yeah.
In Dick's case, around purpose and passion, like, what do I really want? And that's an everyday dance that we get to experience in life. And that's where we start to feel the excitement, the part of life that we're actually here for, that time between when we are born and when we die.
Absolutely, man. And I'll finish on one final story here around, we'll call this guy Mick. So we just got all four around.
I'm shocked you haven't got Dominic in there, but
wow.
But I guess Dominic is really a variation on it. You're an ick. I don't think you realize you're an ick. Yeah.
No, we just that's a new awareness. Thank you. So around this conversation about you were taught to abandon your own inner compass and that someone else knows better than you, Mick's experience in life was, how come I can't speak with conviction? How come I can't speak up for myself? How come I can't tell other people what it is that I want? How come in most situations and circumstances, I don't know what it is that I want? And what he found was, as a child, he learned somewhere along the way that his acceptance was predicated on other people welcoming him, approving of him, praising him, inviting him to play, all those things. And so in life, in absence of feedback from the external world, he does not know how to feel on the inside. And so when there's no feedback, criticism, or praise, he's actually quite lost. And so he's constantly calibrating to other people. And what we ended up doing was, once he was aware of this in his process, he ended up finding inside that he had this whole crew of inner Micks, let's call it, like from different ages, the 8-year-old Mick, inner child, the 15-year-old Mick, the 25-year-old Mick, the great man Mick, right? He had all of these that emerged as his counsel. And these were the guys who knew exactly what he wanted, like where his passions lied, or who had to speak up with that warrior energy. And so what we ended up doing was saying, all right, Mick, next time you don't know where to go and you don't know what it is you're feeling, instead of looking to the outside world for your cues, you've got your inner counsel, and look at them around the table and ask them, where do they see you going? And he already started processing through that. And so this whole past week and last night when we had our Thursday night call, everyone was asking him about it, and you could see he's lit up, and he's already had some like real life transitions in how he's shown up now. So he's working on that wound so he can become 100% of who he is.
I love that. Going from an outer counsel to an inner counsel.
Bingo.
Phenomenal.
All right, guys. So to wrap this one in a bow, there are things in your life that you want that you're just not getting, right? That next level in the area of your life that's important to you. And the reason for it is because there's often this inner armor that's been built around your emotions and your heart that's stifling your inner compass, the things that make you different and unique and beautiful. It's putting the kink in the hose of your emotions. And so if you ever hope to find what lights you up, or to find your passion, or to release some of those emotions that have been stuck down there for some time, then your work, right? As Mark said, your purpose, you're not entitled to it. You have to do work to get it. Your work is to dissolve that inner armor so that stuff can flow freely and you can find the real you. Hey, if you just listened to this episode on Spotify and you like what you heard, will you please consider taking a millisecond and give us a 5-star rating? You may have to go to the show itself, not the episode, but the Great Man Within podcast. Right there at the top is an opportunity to give us a 5-star rating. We really appreciate it and allows other listeners, other men, to find that this is a show worth listening to.